The strategy of setting lineups. What factors go into your start and sit decisions? Matchups, streakiness, number of games in the week, projections, roles. We'll go through all these factors to consider for your thought process. Plus, we'll have some trade deadline deal reviews, waiver wire, pitcher preview, injuries, and more. RotoWire's Clay Link joins us on the Beat the Shift podcast next. And welcome to another episode of the Beat the Shift podcast. I am your host, Ariel Cohen, and with me as always is Ruvain Guy. How are you, Ruvain?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. We're starting to see some of those trades in as the trade deadline is approaching next week. Really, really hot in New York. We got a heat wave. It's 90s every single day. How about you? How are you handling the heat, Ruvain?
It's a shame our sports teams aren't as hot as the heat wave that's going on here right now because the New York teams are buyers, sellers. We have no idea what's going on, and it's going to affect our local teams. It's also going to affect our fantasy teams.
Yeah, so there we go, and see what the Mets do at the deadline. All right, well, we've got a great show. We've got a fantastic guest. Plays with me in Tout Wars. He's over at RotoWire, the original winner of the TGFBI overall. Welcome to the show, Clay Link. How are you, Clay?
Hey, fellas. Good to be back on the show. Good to talk with you as always, Ariel and Ruvain. I'm doing pretty well. It's kind of the dog days, kind of hot here in Wisconsin even. Humid hot, so it's trying to battle through and stay laser focused to the end of the season.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a great show, and we're going to talk a lot about lineups, as you might have been setting some of your lineups along the way, and there's a lot of strategy involved. There's trade deadline strategy, so we're going to talk a lot about all of that, and let's just throw the question out for you very generally, Clay. You know, when you set your lineups, and this week was a tough one, because there was a lot of teams playing 5 games, playing 7 games, and there's always questions. What do you look for in general when setting your lineup in terms of players, whether to play the active ones or swap them out for a bench guy?
Well, I bet you guys are like me in that the process for setting lineups really begins with Fab and kind of looking at what I need. You know, has anybody been placed on the IL or option to the minors? Are guys losing out on playing time? What holes do I need to fill? So the lineup setting process really ties into the Fab process, and it starts the weekend before. And so looking ahead, I usually try to stay kind of focused on the half weeks in the NFBC. If guys are playing only 2 games, I'll usually swap them out unless it's a superstar player. And try not to focus too much on cold streaks because it's kind of arbitrary endpoints really throughout the season. It's a small sample, so I try not to get too caught up in streakiness, but more so just looking at playing time, being sure guys aren't in the minors and still in my lineup or on the injured list. So it's for me, it's kind of a process with the Fab and a situation where I really kind of tie it all together, and it kind of blends into the Fab process. So my thinking starts the week before with setting lineups.
All right, fair points. Ruvain, what about you for your general method and strategy for setting yours?
I tend to agree with Clay here because when you look at your lineup before you do Fab, you have to see where you're going to have any holes. And if you're going to have any holes the following week, or if you want to swap out someone who you know is going to have 5 games for someone who's going to have 7 games and who's on the Fab wire, and you can pick them up and you can just swap them in and get that extra 2 days if those players are comparable. I also think that it's very important to look Sunday night, Monday morning, Monday afternoon to see what news comes out, to see if any players all of a sudden out of nowhere have to end up on the IL and to change your lineup really early. So you have to be aware of who's healthy, who's not healthy, and you have to be aware when the games start on Monday because there are a lot of early starts, especially in the summer. There are some day games on Monday. If you don't get that lineup set properly right away, you may be screwed for the entire week.
Yeah, so Clay makes a very good point that really you're looking first at your waiver wire, and a lot of times you're baking in, I'm going to drop this person and start this person simultaneously, that your lineup setting process doesn't just come on Monday, who's better. Certainly, obviously, on Monday you will play who's better, but the decisions come beforehand with judging what could be a accretive to swap out. I look at projections. I start with looking at next of 1 week projections. I know the Bat, Derek Carty, does a good job with that. I believe Rasball has it. I know CBS Sportsline also has it as well. But just looking at raw projections, because sometimes you do get caught up with some streakiness. Person is hot or not. And actually, I want to ask you about this, Clay, because you sort of mentioned that you're not into streakiness. If you see a guy who's went 0 for 12 the previous week, are you gonna sit him, or maybe not over 12, maybe over 20? Are you gonna say, all right, this guy looks off, maybe he's not healthy, and just not play him? And of course, on the flip end, if this guy hit 2 home runs over the weekend and he's batting 500, let's say, over the last 2 weeks, are you more inclined to play him, even if he's a lower player?
I try not to get caught up in all that, because when I made the decision to pick up or draft that player and deploy them, I had a certain expectation. If they're falling short of that over a small sample, I don't want to overreact. So I really try not to get caught up in streaks too much. Of course, if those streaks are affecting playing time, then I will have to take notice. But I think doing that and kind of over managing can be a problem. If you are a little too pull happy with some of these guys and take them out at the wrong time, you could really end up regretting it. The fringe guys, maybe you play the streaks a little bit more, those end of your roster types, but I really try not to, because I think you can, really shoot yourself in the foot, because the best players in the game can go into a slump and go hitless for a week, and then they could explode. So I think you could really do yourself a disservice if you get caught too much up in streaky performances on the field.
You take a guy like Anthony Rizzo. Ruben and I own Anthony Rizzo in an NFBC league, and he just looked hurt, right? It's one thing if a guy if a fringe guy is hot, to not buy into that. But if you have a guy who's not at the top, certainly somebody in the first 4 or 5 rounds, you're going to play no matter what. But if you have a guy who's a $0 to even $10 player, Anthony Rizzo, he just looked hurt. And the theory is that maybe it's not just a cold streak. Maybe it's something else. Ruben, what about you? I mean, you were inclined to sit him for a while until we see something, right?
Yeah, and Rizzo was the guy I was going to bring up, because Anthony Rizzo, before he hurt his neck, and there was an injury, he didn't go on the IL, but he's playing every day, and he's playing first base, so he's not losing any playing time, but he sort of has to play. With Aaron Judge out, he's forcing himself to play, even if he had an injury that required an IL stint, he's still playing because the Yankees need him. They need him in that lineup no matter what. So if he's playing a little hurt, same thing like with Pete Alonso when he came back too early from his wrist injury when he got hit. They said he was gonna be out for 3 weeks. He came back for 10 days. He was ice cold for about 2-3 weeks, and then Clay, you mentioned you don't know when they're gonna turn it on. You don't know what's gonna happen. And Alonso he has found what's going on. He figured it out, and maybe he's just 100% healthy now. But Rizzo is still the same thing. He homered over the weekend, but 1 home run over a weekend after not homering for about a month and a half, that's still a cold streak for him, and it's very hard to keep someone in that lineup, even if you have a better option. Like, and knowing NFBC, we picked up Patrick Wisdom, and we've been playing him instead, and I think even having him in the lineup is better than having an injured Anthony Rizzo, or what I think is an injured Anthony Rizzo who's underperforming.
Yeah, Anthony Rizzo is a really good, really tough example, because he's one where my stubbornness probably would have backfired, because I probably would have kept him in through a lot of that until it just got to the point where it was just so obvious that he was not himself. But I probably would have kept him in my lineup far longer than I should have, because I am kind of a stubborn person.
Yeah, I mean, certainly with Pete Alonso, he was hurt, and he did underperform, and you probably shouldn't have had him in your lineup. But, when you get to that stage, Pete Alonso was a second rounder this year. what's the opportunity cost? Who you're playing instead of him? Are you going to pick up somebody from the waiver wire to play over Pete Alonso, right? Just like the team decides, you know what, Alonso's better than whatever. Alonso at 80% is better than whatever option that we have, or Alonso at 50% is probably better than whatever other option they had for the minors. They figure, do that. Well, you should probably do that for your fantasy team too. Certainly, if you have a fringe guy versus another fringe guy, take the hot one over the cold, right? It's all about drawing the line in must start. Where's the line in must start for the hitters? Now, that's hitters, but what about pitchers? If a guy is struggling and has thrown, 3 games in a row of clunkers, 5 runs or more, I tend to, unless he's at the very top, unless he's talking about, a number 1, maybe number 2 pitcher, I tend to maybe want to sit them with 3 clunkers in a row. And conversely, if you have somebody towards the bottom who's had 3 starts in a row, unless you can see that the person's very lucky, maybe, look at the BABIP, very lucky, strand rate is ridiculously lucky. If they look legit, strikeouts are up, walks are down, I would continue rolling with them and saying, you know what, there's something there. Like Yusei Kikuchi is my example that I saw him really early, looked really good, and I said, you know what, it looks legit. I'm going to pick him up. I'm going to keep playing him, and I would play him over maybe some of my other fringe guys because I like the stats. So I think the streakiness for pitchers, I think 3 games in a row for me of either hot or cold is an indication, of course, assuming that there's no luck involved. Do you agree with that, Clay?
Yeah, I think so. I think with pitching, you can kind of get a sense. 3 starts for a pitcher, I think, is more telling than 3 games for a hitter. So I think you can read a little bit more into a pitcher's success or struggles over a 3-start sample than you can for hitters. But I still think you want to, you don't want to make any sudden roster moves. You don't want to drop a guy who's struggling if you believed in them preseason. I think. I had a guy like Graham Ashcraft on a few teams, and it was going really well and really poorly, and now it's going well again. So I think you want to maybe ride out some streaks with pitchers, and sure you can make some lineup changes, but I think I need a bigger sample before I actually drop a pitcher. I wouldn't want to cut a guy who's got some upside, but maybe has hit a rough patch. Like maybe like a Blake Snell earlier this season, that could have really burned you if you'd in a shallower league dropped him amidst his struggles.
Well, what about I'll give you an example. What about Joe Ryan? Joe Ryan has been very good all year, but look what he's done recently. He's in his last start, 3 2/3, 4 runs. The start before that, 6 innings, 4 runs, 3 runs against Oakland, 5 runs against Baltimore. I mean, is that a streak where you want to think about sitting him? He's supposed to pitch possibly against St. Louis this coming week. Is this a guy you just have to ride with, or are you more concerned that there's something underlying, something going on?
Oh, that's a good question. I think with a guy like Joe Ryan, you have to just ride him out because realistically, what are your, like kind of what Ariel alluded to, who are you going to have on your bench or who are you going to pick up that's going to realistically be an improvement over Joe Ryan? Maybe you could look at somebody and say, oh, yeah, maybe with this matchup he could be, but the overall body of work is still really strong. And this is such a hard game. Think about Manny Machado through the end of June had like a 686 OPS. Now, that's on the hitting side, but I think either way, pitchers can, even if they're really good, kind of fall into a little bit of a slump. Maybe their mechanics get out of sync a little bit. And I don't want to miss out on what could be a big rebound from Joe Ryan. So next week against St. Louis, I feel great about turning him loose there. I really want to focus more on the overall work. And if a guy is really struggling, maybe there's an injury, but I don't want to put too much stock into the performance over a few starts.
Hey, what do you do with the Yankee pair of pitchers, Luis Severino and Domingo Germán? Severino has been really bad all year. Lately, you've had a couple of good starts, a couple of bad starts. Germán, he's been up and down. He had that no-hitter, and then he had a blow-up.
Game. You're selling him short.
Sorry. No-hitter. Perfect game, Domingo Germán. And then, he was terrible against the Mets the other night. What do you do with that?
Oh, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, but I think with Germán, there's so many like long balls. It's hard for me to trust the guy who gives up so many homers. He's given up 9 in his last 6 outings. The K to walk looks good, but even with that perfect game built in, he's got a ERA over 5.5 over his last 6 outings. So he's a guy that I think is very much fringe in most leagues. Probably going to be bouncing on and off rosters the rest of the way, but I'd probably hold on to him in a 15-teamer because of the Ks. But I think in a 12, he's going to be a guy who's added and dropped, and that's probably how he should be treated. A guy who's just bouncing off rosters the rest of the way.
Well, I have him in Tout Wars in the same league as you, a 12-team league, and I might be dropping him. Again, it all depends on who's available instead, right?
Yeah. Severino, I have no idea about. I'd love to hear if you guys have any read on him.
Well, we actually have him in NFBC. I think we have him in NFBC. Or we have him in one of the
Labor.
in labor. I'm sorry, we have him in labor, and we were thinking about dropping him this past week, but he's 2-start for this week, so we wanted to see how he played out, how those 2 starts. I think it was 2 weeks ago. He was 2-start because if you can't pitch him when he's 2-start, and if you don't feel comfortable pitching him when he's a 2-start pitcher, then he shouldn't be on your roster at all. There are waiver guys who you can do 2-start, like this week Patrick Corbin and maybe again an Austin Gomber 2-start. I think those guys right now are on the same level as Severino, because Severino is just not consistent. There's something off. Also, he's not 100%. Maybe he's not 100%. He's trying to push it. There's something not right, and I just don't feel comfortable with 1-start. And if it's 2-start, and you can't start him with 2-start, then you have to drop him. But I think he's a hold just because he has that potential. I hate to use the word, but potential of all those strikeouts, and the projections gave him a lot of strikeouts, and hopefully he will get those strikeouts for you, because even if you get that 1-start pitcher on the waiver wire, you're not going to get as many strikeouts out of them as you may get out of Severino.
Clay, what do you do when setting your lineup in terms of matchups? And I guess it's a combination of matchups and picking up off the waiver wire, right? I mean, are you looking at the teams that they face? Are you looking at lefty-righty for hitters? Are you looking at whether they have 5 games versus 7 games for a pickup? Are you looking at, oh, wow, here's a lefty platoon guy. Is he facing righties or lefties? Like, what things come into play for you when trying to make your pickups towards setting your lineups?
Yeah, I think, I will take a glance at Todd Zola's weekly hitter rankings over at RotoWire, just to get a sense of, which teams, match up well or have good favorable matchups against certain pitchers, and which platoon players could be on the outs for playing time in a half week. So I'll look at that, but it's more so just games for me in the half week. If a guy's playing 2, like I mentioned, I want to usually get him out. If he's playing 3 against an option that I have playing 4, I'll dive in a little bit deeper and weigh things, but. And too, if I have a guy like Jock Peterson or somebody like that, and I'll just want to be sure that they're not facing a bunch of lefties in a row. So, I don't really start any short side platoon bats, but I will want to check my strong side platoon bats to be sure that they're not, facing a slew of same-handed pitchers in a given week. But typically for me, I'm focusing more on matchups on the pitching side and just doing what I can on the hitting side to plug any holes.
Yeah, no, I agree. Pretty much. The thing about the number of games is that, and we talked about this last week and a couple times in the show, that if you have a guy, let's say in the let's say for the whole week playing 7 games, he's let's say a $5 player, and you have a guy who's a $20 player playing 5 games. If you do the math, the stats are going to be almost even or even favored by the guy who plays 5 games, right? A guy who's playing 7 games, maybe he's on pace for, 65 RBIs from his stats all year, and the $20 player who's only had 5 games, maybe is on pace for 85. But you do the math, if you take 5/7 of a number, you're still going to get more stats from the guy playing the 7 games, right? Even if he's a better player, even if he's a worse player than the guy playing 5. And when you're having the half week in the NFBC, playing 2 games versus 3 or 2 games versus 4, I mean, there's no contest. Even if you take the top guys, I mean, I would never sit a first rounder, but let's say a guy in the fifth round. I don't know. I might be playing some of these fringe waiver wire guys, as long as they're regular players, right? Not platoon guys. I'll be playing them over the guys with only 2 games almost every single time if they have 4. I mean, do the math. It's double the stats. You're not getting double the value from playing a hero, right?
But that doesn't apply for like your top 4 or 5 picks, right? Like you're not going to swap out Nolan Arenado, for on 2 games for 3 from some, Jake Berger or somebody like that.
No. There's obviously a line up top which you're never playing,
Yeah.
and of course, the opportunity cost, like who you're replacing with, it goes all the way down to the bottom. But there might be situations where you have a middling guy. Maybe your third outfielder who has 2 games versus a fifth outfielder type who has 4. That's, to me, an easy decision to go with the guy who has 4 games, provided he's not a platoon player.
Yeah, I think that's smart. I mean, I think over the course of a season, if you do that, you're going to come out well ahead because you're adding, I don't know, 100 at bats, maybe more. If you play those if you add those games to your lineup and swap out guys with only 2.5 weeks. So, yeah, I think it's all about accumulating. But top 5 or so picks, 5 rounds, I will pretty much leave those guys set for the whole season.
But there's one thing you have to think about, though, because those guys you're going to swap in that have 3 games instead of 2, those guys may be just home run guys or just maybe stolen base guys. You have to see whether or not that fits what you need in your profile for your team. Like if you need stolen bases and the guy plays 2 games and another guy plays 3 games, I don't know if I want to do that because the chance of him maybe playing, maybe not playing. Let's say you have a John Birdie type player, whether you want him in your lineup or not. If he's playing every day, then fine, take him. Then no problem. But you don't know if he's going to. Some guys you don't know if they're going to play every day, and that's the risk you take when you get these quote unquote fringe players that you don't know whether or not they're going to get the full playing time, whether they're going to play both games, whether they're going to play 3 games, whether they're going to get the stats that you want, because there's no guarantees in that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, let's be clear. Sorry to interrupt you, Ariel. Let's be clear that over the course of the season, we all bat like 550 on our borderline lineup calls. You're going to get a lot wrong, so you just got to try to minimize those ones you get wrong. You're going to leave some stats on your bench, but you can't really worry too much about that because every other player is making those, getting some wrong on the fringe lineup calls, just like you are. So
now I do want to talk about 2-start pitchers. I mean, just go back 5 years ago, and whoever was a 2-start pitcher, you'd be like, let's pick him up, unless he's really at the bottom. But there was always a number of pitchers who'd be like, okay, 2-start, let's give it a shot. Here's 5 2-start pitchers, and take one of them. I find that nowadays that not to be true, and for 2 reasons. Number one, the quality of the players who are fringe and available on the waiver wire, especially in the 15 or deeper type leagues, they're just not there. Like, there's nobody who you say, wow, let's give a chance. They're all, 5 ERA guys. Just nobody even to think of. But furthermore, there's no win potential. I mean, you have guys who are fringe, they're going 4 innings. And if they're going 4 innings, 2 games, sure, they're pitching 8 innings for the week, but there's 0 chances for a win, right? You're picking up the 2-star pitchers because you think that you're going to get a potential for a win or maybe 2. You're not getting that anymore. I'm more inclined to not overdo with those 2-star pitchers. Either focus on a good 1-start or even play a good middle reliever who might get you. Only caveat to that is there are some fringe pitchers who, if you somehow are okay on ratios and you're okay on wins, and they just do get the strikeouts, they get 5-6 strikeouts to start, well, then your 2-star pitcher, we're talking about 10, 12 strikeouts. That's already something. But otherwise, I'm not inclined to go for those anymore. Thoughts, Clay?
I think you make a lot of really good points there, Ariel, because we've talked a lot about 2-star pitchers on our Friday podcast over at RotoWire, and one of our listeners did a little bit of a study, I think it was last year, 2 years ago maybe, found that only about 60% of the pitchers who are projected for 2 starts actually end up making that second turn, whether it's due to rain out, injury, you know how it is. shuffling in the rotation. So you're really not, it's kind of a coin toss if you're even getting that second start. You're right that pitchers aren't going as deep into games, so the win potential isn't there. I think, yeah, it's also a situation where I think the fantasy community at large has kind of gotten smarter, and a lot of these guys aren't freely available on the waiver wire to pick up for two. So it's a combination of things, but I think you're right that two-star pitchers are kind of coming less and less desirable because a lot of them struggle, they're fringe guys, and B, they might not make that second turn. So it's you look at the guy, you think you might have two, but I think you got to really consider that tentative and not give them a big edge over a one-star guy who may be better skilled with a slightly better matchup.
Ruben, do you agree?
Yeah, and I think you have a better chance sometimes of getting a win using a reliever because a lot of relievers are getting a lot of wins and they're not going to hurt you as much in your ERA and WHIP. And you may not get the strikeouts, but you still may have a possibility of gaining in two categories, possibly a third with the wins. When you have a two-star pitcher, you're trying to gain the wins, but you're sacrificing possibly sacrificing ERA and WHIP and the strikeouts. These two-star pitchers are not high strikeout pitchers. If they're high strikeout pitchers, then the high K per nine, they would not be on the waiver wire to begin with. So they're the reason why they're there. They're the reason why they'll get maybe four strikeouts to start. So you're going to get 8 strikeouts. And if you have a reliever who goes 3 times and gets 1 to 2 strikeouts when he's out there, that's 6 strikeouts. You're going to have a better ERA, better WHIP, and just almost as good a chance of getting wins.
Yeah, no, 100%. Clay, in terms of your roto leagues, at what point do you consider category standings when setting your lineup? So, usually in the first part of the year, we're playing your best player no matter what, right? You don't play crappy players. You don't look for it there. But at some point, we know at the very end, when you see, oh, wow, I need a couple of steals, I'm okay with homers. What point in the season do you switch and say, all right, before I set my lineups, I got to look at the standings and my position first?
Well, typically around the All-Star break, I'll do full evaluation of my teams, kind of take stock of where I'm at in certain categories, and maybe start to, try to corner certain categories at the expense of others. I don't like to do that much earlier in the season because it is such a long season, and it takes a while for these categories to really take shape. So I don't want to get too caught up in chasing certain stats until about the halfway point of the year, the All Star break, and won't really put that much into action until around August 1st. So I really stick to the best 23 players I can for the first 3 months or so. What about you guys? Do you start to look at where you're at in the categories earlier than that?
Yeah, I think I look like you said around the All Star break. I think it's a good time to look at it because in a lot of leagues that have trading, the trade deadline is coming up for a lot of people. Same around like a week after or during the time of the MLB All Star MLB trade deadline as well.
Mhm.
So if you see you're so far behind in a category that even if you try to get more counting stats in that category, like stolen bases, and you see you're just not going to catch up or you're not going to gain that many points relative to what you want to get, then I think it's time to bench those players or even try to trade those players if you're in a trading lead. And same thing with saves. Let's say you're far ahead in saves or you're near the bottom in saves and you don't have that much points to gain or lose, then I think at that point you should really see maybe trading one of these closers or something like that or even in an instance if you have a fringe reliever who gets some saves or is in a committee, you may want to think about even dropping them just so you can have another roster spot so you can churn starters if you need it.
So I don't look at all in the first 2 months whatsoever. The only caveats to that, though, are in the initial draft. If you see where you are in the standings in terms of projected categories, and if there's a big imbalance, then I might check that. But assuming it's all even, then I don't need to. The other caveat in looking at it early is if you have an injury to a guy, either in a top guy who just does a lot of different categories. Then I might check that league a little bit more because I'm being hurt at the top, or if there's a category specific guy. I mean, if you had Luis Arias and and he's hurt, then you would check your batting average. If you're gonna have Esteury Ruiz, you're gonna look at your stolen bases and see where you are, right? So if you have an injury sometime in the early going, then you'd want to take a look at it a little bit more in depth. Otherwise, I'm not really looking at it for the first couple of months. In June, I'll glance at it a little bit just to see, hey, do I have any major holes? I'm not looking at it every week for setting up lineups, but I'm looking at it to see, do I need to pick up somebody on the waiver wire? Do I need to make a trade? After the All-Star break, though, I'm looking at it almost every waiver wire period. Not that I'm going to be able to do anything with it, anything major with it, but just in case you have to make a pickup, maybe you'll tilt towards a category. Or in case where there's a lineup question, maybe you tilt toward it. And of course, the last month, you're really just looking at it and seeing where you need the stats, and you fortify it in the last month of September.
Yeah, in the last month, I just want to scratch and claw for any roto points I could possibly get. If that means sitting all my closers, maybe even dropping them, then so be it. Because in the end, it's just about jockeying for placement in your league. And if you if you're at the point where you're winning the league is kind of out of it, but maybe you could get up into the money, second or third, well then do whatever you have to do to get up there. Because in the end, it's all about money. The only thing real about this game is money. So.
Yeah. Clay, in terms of roto, in terms of pitching, how much do you consider the potential of damaging your ratios versus counting stats? So if you're playing some fringe starters at the bottom, how do you decide when to say, all right, let me get those extra strikeouts versus, I don't want to throw that guy. It could hurt my ratios. Like, obviously in the last couple of weeks in the season, as you just said, you're going to go whatever category you need more. But how do you do that early on in the year?
Good question. If I have an extra reliever who's pretty good, like a Yenier Cano, who was pitching well earlier this season anyway, maybe I'll swap him in if I feel like a starter's at risk of lighting my ratios on fire. But typically I like to keep a split of 6 starters and 3 relievers, or 7 and 2. And I don't really like to stray from that and add more relievers. Like I don't really like 4 relievers to help ratios. Maybe you do that early on or in a week that's kind of wonky, like the coming out of the All-Star break. But I really want to get as many starters in there because I don't want to fall behind in wins and Ks. So I will probably it's been to my detriment several times, and probably a weakness in my game that I could address in time. But usually I will trot out some questionable starters, probably against my better judgment, just because I don't want to fall back in wins and Ks, which could be really hard to make up ground in later on.
Do you agree, Ruben?
Yeah, I do agree to a certain extent though, because you're not going to get many wins out of some of those 2-star pitchers. You're going to get some of them, especially if it's early in the year. They may not go the innings you need to, and later in the year, it gets a little bit harder to help with to fix your ratios. If you do it, let's say June and May, and maybe a little bit even in July now, that's fine. You still have 2 months where you can make up the ratios, where you can throw those middle relievers and hopefully make up those ratios. But I don't want to do it to the detriment of how I'm doing overall, because if you see that you're in a position where your ERA and WHIP can take a hit when it comes to the ratios, and then I'll throw out the 2-star pitcher. But I think if I'm going to lose points initially with it, I'm a little nervous because it's hard to gain those points back right away. And also remember, you're playing against other teams, and they're looking at the ERA and WHIP also. They may play the reliever game instead, and you have to mix and match and try to fit. Each league is on its own bubble, and you have to figure out how that works. But I tried to stay away from especially some of the 2-star pitchers that I know are questionable, and I will actually do that. I will throw 4 relievers at a time. I will throw 4 closers, especially early on in the season. And we've done that because that's when the closers have their jobs, and you know that they're going to have the opportunity to get them. But I don't like throwing out the questionable starts. I like the 2 starts, but I don't like throwing out the questionable starts.
Yeah. I'm more to the point of, don't play really safe and don't throw out, potentially crappy starters. Although I have found myself this year lacking in strikeouts. Wins has been a crapshoot, so not that category, but strikeouts. It really depends. Really depends on the format. I'm doing the NFBC auction, and we're at the top with strikeouts. That's because we've focused on getting good starters, and we played it safe at the bottom. It worked. In the 12-team leagues, though, I probably let's call it 10 and 12. I probably could have gambled a little bit more. I probably could have thrown the extra starter because the extra starter is a higher quality than they are in the 15. And I find myself a little bit low on the strikeouts in 10 to 12 leagues. It really is a gamble each year because you don't know what the player pool is going to be. But it seems that for this year, you should have gambled more on the 10 to 12 and played it safe on the 15 is what I thought. Hey, what do you guys do with Shohei Ohtani? Do you ever consider starting him as a pitcher? I know that in labor, we started him for the first 4 weeks, and that's because we had 3 major pitcher injuries early on. We had to, and we had healthy hitters. But nowadays, it's so hard not to throw him as a hitter, but, he's one of the best pitchers also. Is there any advice other than it is what it is with the pitching? You just got to throw him as a hitter, Clay?
Well, it's nice that he gives you that kind of safety net to where if you have a bunch of injuries on the pitching side, you can slot him in. I wouldn't do it. I would just kind of set it and forget on the offensive side, put him in that util and just let him be. But, yeah, it's kind of nice to have that option. I just wouldn't really take it and haven't really much in the spots where I have Ohtani. So it's nice, but in, weekly lineup leagues, for me, it's kind of an obvious call that you just got to take those hitting stats.
Yeah, other than a 2-start. If Ohtani is 2-star pitcher,
yeah.
that would be. Now, a question for you, Clay, as someone who won an overall contest here. When do you actually look at the categories in your overall as opposed to just your league? So if you're playing in the NFBC and you're doing rather well, you're in first or second place, do you have any sights on the overall, or are you still looking to fill categories on your league level? When do you switch, or do you look at all?
It's funny. I was talking about that with Todd Zola, who also won an overall in the TGFBI, and kind of made a good point that when things are going that well, your lineup just kind of sets itself. Like you just kind of keep rolling with what got you there. So I don't really. When I was fortunate enough to be in the lead in TGFBI, I was just enjoying the ride. Basically, it was just I couldn't really make a ton of bad calls. I wasn't shooting myself in the foot, and I was just kind of hoping to keep that streak going. And so, at the end, maybe I took a glance, but I think I pretty much kept my same lineup construction and then everything throughout the season. So if things are going well to where you're competing for an overall, I would say that you shouldn't overthink it, and you should basically just ride with what got you there. So I don't think you can do yourself a disservice by getting too deep into the weeds.
And Ruvain, you finished second to Todd in the overall that year. So did you have any sights on the overall, or did you just look at your league, or you just played the best player at the end?
Well, in my situation, in my league, I was blowing everyone out. I had like a 20-point lead, so I wasn't even looking at the league anymore. For the last 6 to 8 weeks of the season, I was looking at the overall. I was trying my best to try to see what I can do to get there. I never was able to overcake Todd Zola. He did end up beating me by like a couple of points, but I think we have a team right now in NFBC in the auction league that we are 30th overall, and we're second in our league. The top, I believe it's the top 12 that pay out if you're going to if you're talking about the overall. I don't think it's worthwhile to look at the overall yet because you're still jockeying for position in your regular league. If you don't place in your regular league, usually you're not going to place in the overall anyway. So I think you have to concentrate on your regular league first. Maybe if you're still in it or you're in the top 30, let's say, when it comes down to mid-August and beginning of September, then you can start looking at it. But a lot of times when you're at the top, you're looking at both. You're looking at looking to where to improve. A lot of times where you have to improve in your league is where you have to improve in the overall anyway.
All right, good points. And before we talk more about some trade deadline players, time for the Injury Gurus Trivia of the Week.
So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about right now. We're going to be talking about noteworthy trades of value from team to team and who we're going to drop, who we're going to hold on to, and everything like that. So my first question, and this trivia question, is going to deal with the first player we're going to be dealing with. And there are 4 closers in baseball. There have been 4 closer relievers, let's say relievers, who have 10 or more saves and an ERA over 4. Who are they?
10 or more saves this year and ERA over 4?
This year and an ERA over 4 this year. Who are they?
Go first.
Okay, well, I'm going to say Alex Lang.
No, he just missed it. He's just under 4.
I'll start with Kyle Finnegan.
No. So one of them happens to be one of the guys we're going to talk about, and that's Pierce Johnson. He has an ERA over 5, and he has over 10 saves. Now, there's one other guy on this list who has an ERA over 5 also with 10 saves. Could you guess him?
Scott Barlow?
Scott Barlow. His ERA is over 5, and he's got more than 10 saves. I think he has 12. But the 2 other pitchers we're missing, A.J. Puck. His ERA is over 4, and A.J. Minter. He's not the closer anymore, but he was closer long enough he got more than 10 saves, and his ERA is also over 4. So Pierce Johnson was the guy who I'm referencing here because he was traded to the Braves. And when he's traded, he was a partial closer, and now he's not a closer at all coming to the Braves. So Clay, is he just going to be a straight drop in your leagues right now?
I think so because of how many quality arms are ahead of him in that Atlanta bullpen. So, Iglesias has been awesome. I mean, Minter's on the IL, but they got Joe Jimenez, Yates. I don't see him getting a ton of leftover saves. So maybe if you're a league that counts holds, sure, you hold on to him. But I think generally in a 5x5 traditional mixed league, you cut Pierce Johnson.
Yeah, Pierce Johnson is an easy cut in almost every single format. Maybe a very deep NL only, maybe, but he's a cut. All right, so a couple of other noteworthy trades, talking about change in fantasy value. Kike Hernandez was traded to the Dodgers, and just to lump it in, Ahmed Rosario was also sent to the Dodgers in exchange for Noah Syndergaard. I think Noah Syndergaard is not worth playing anymore. But what about Kike Hernandez, Ahmed Rosario? Rosario had been cut in a lot of even shallow leagues. Kike Hernandez, any of these guys worth owning more? I would probably say yes to both now. Kike Hernandez probably now viable in 15-team league as a injury replacement, and Rosario now becomes more interesting. The RBI opportunity, the run scored opportunity. I like that move for him for his fantasy value. Do you agree, Clay?
Yeah, I think he probably will play quite a bit. I still don't know if Med Rosario's a great option. Because I think they do kind of like Miguel Rojas, so I don't know if it's going to be a Med Rosario as the regular there right away. Could be, but Kike, I think they kind of made clear that if he was coming back aboard the Dodgers, he's going to fill a very niche role. So I think he's only against lefties, and probably, you said maybe 15, could be, but I think that might be kind of pushing it. I would probably hope for a better option. Ahmed Rosario, though, at least gets a little bit of life into him, and if he was dropped, I think you cut him or you pick him up, but I think you do so with the knowledge that he's going to have to earn his playing time on this Dodgers team. It's not going to be handed to him.
And the fact that Rosario is 27, Miguel Ross is 34. I think down the stretch, Rosario may get a little bit more playing time, but I think to begin with, he may actually lose some playing time because he was almost a regular in Cleveland. Here, he's not going to be almost a regular because they have so many guys who play so many different positions. Kike Hernandez can play the infield. Chris Taylor can play the infield. They have so many guys now. They have a glut of multi-position eligibility players on that team that it's going to be basically it's a merry-go-round. You don't know who's going to be starting when, and it's very hard to if you want to start him in your league. If you start him for a week, how many games is Rosario going to play? Let's say they have a 6-game week, is he going to play 4 games? Is he going to play 5 games? Or is he going to play all 6? So he's a guy that if you really want to get those county stats, I don't think you really count on him because he may actually have a downturn in playing time.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Kike Hernandez, maybe 15. You're right. Clay is a little too aggressive. I just know that the Dodgers like him. I mean, they had him before. And Rosario, I think it's a wait and see. I think you might be surprised that he'll start more. I mean, he's had a lot of multi-hit games in the last couple of years. He's been a good batting average player. Maybe the Dodgers see something. So I think that, we got a couple of days before the weekend. I think you can see how often he starts. And of course, if he does, then I think his value goes up. And maybe you're right about his playing time going down. I'm going to say that he'll probably be on the optimistic side. So if you're in a pick up at any time kind of spot, and you're in a 10-team league and he's available, I think you should definitely give it a shot. He's definitely worth the try. Another trade that had.
Do you mind if? Well, I was going to bring up another trade. I just kind of would love to hear what you guys think about the Angels publicly pulling Shohei off the market and then trading for Giolito and Ronaldo Lopez. I was not necessarily surprised that they pulled Ohtani off the market, but I was a little surprised they traded two top prospects for Giolito and Ronaldo Lopez.
Yeah. With the wild card having with each league having 3 wild card teams, the chance to make it is so great, and the Angels are, they're there. I can't say that they will make it. Certainly they've got some injuries too, but hey, they have a chance. According to the ATC projections on Fangraphs, the probability for the Angels making the playoffs is, actually, it's only 15%. So, it's 1 in 6. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it's also political. It's also about the fans. How can you trade away Ohtani? How can you do that? You got Mike Trout on the team. It's just a bad message to the fans. You also lose the ability to sign him. Maybe they want to sign him. Maybe they are going to be an aggressive bidder, and certainly if they trade him, that they're out. I think that the pulling Ohtani is less of a surprise to me. The going for Giolito is a little bit more surprising. I mean, they don't have to. They could try what they have. But, maybe it's a message to the fans, and you never know. I was never a big Giolito fan in general. Obviously, it's a much better spot for him to play in, more wins, better ballpark. As far as Reynaldo Lopez, I think that's a minor trade. That just helps the bullpen. I'm a little surprised, but it's positive for Giolito's value fantasy-wise, I think. Ruben?
Well, actually, I think Giolito's going to go into a 6-man rotation now, so you may actually lose a start here and there, which is possible. But I think this trade was done for Shohei Ohtani, to show him, to maybe have the Angels maybe try to keep him, to show that, if we're close, we're going to go for it. We want to be competitive, because that's what he wants to be. He wants to be competitive. So this trade may not get them anywhere, but it's to show Shohei that they want to win, and that he should try to stay with them, because when they're close, they will go all in.
I mean, the Angels re-signed Mike Trout, so they've had a pretty decent short-term track record, I'd say. You'd say about signing these players, and we've seen with the Rendon signing that they're willing to do these big signings. So maybe this is for the message of Ohtani. And breaking news just now for us as we're recording is Carlos Santana. Rain, why don't you break the news?
Yeah, Carlos Santana was traded from the Pirates to Milwaukee. He was traded for a minor league shortstop, an 18-year-old, and Carlos Santana is 37. It's a 19-year age difference in trade capital, which is kind of interesting. The question is, the Brewers are now acquiring Carlos Santana. He's going to play first base a little bit. Was Rowdy Tellez going to lose some playing time? Is Santana going to lose some playing time now? Are they going to have him there for the DH because Jesse Winker just went on the IL, so they need another bat in the lineup? I think that's probably the core. I think Santana is going to DH some more. I think Santana will have the same amount of at bats, and with Tellez still being out, I think they needed a first baseman immediately. And because the NL Central is so not good, they still think they have a chance, and they do have a chance, and I think they're just trying to push their chips. This is like a minor trade. It's not a major trade, but playing time wise, Carlos Santana will be in a better lineup, hypothetically a better lineup, and he'll get the same amount of plate appearances. So I think Carlos Santana's value actually goes up. Clay, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's a pretty nice park to hit in. It's kind of used to be Miller Park, now American Family Field, still plays the same. But I think for Santana, switch hitter will probably be a nice fit in that park. And yeah, I think he'll probably be his playing time will probably even out and be the same as it would have been. Rowdy Tellez had a bit of a setback recently, um, but he was getting his stitches removed, so he's going to be out for a little while yet. And so clear, crystal clear in the meantime. And then when Tellez is back, maybe he sits a little bit more frequently. But like you said, Ruvain, Santana DH a lot makes a lot of sense. So probably room for both Tellez and Santana against right-handed pitching.
Yeah, Tellez should actually have a decrease. Ruvain, we've got Rowdy Tellez in a 15-team NFBC. He's hurt now, and who knows what playing time he'll get later. Is that almost a drop? I mean, I think in a 12-team league, Tellez is a drop now. Is he a drop in a 15?
In our specific case, the answer is no. In most cases, the answer is going to probably be 50-50, but in our case, is no, because our team still needs power. One of the categories we're lacking in is home runs, and we need home runs. He's still a home run threat, and you're not going to get that many home run threats off of the waiver wire. So if you need still power, he is going to come back. He's going to come back in about 2 or 3 weeks, and hopefully his hand will be completely healthy, and hopefully he'll provide some power. Because if you, but let's say, have Santana DH and have Tellez batting right after him at first base, those are two big power bats there. They're going to generate some RBIs and home runs there. So I don't think he's a drop in our specific case, but again, it's a team by team basis.
Yeah, I know we always like to make general rules and say the drop or this, and of course we always say that, well, it depends on your team situation. It's really true. I mean, you can make a general, this is what's going to apply to most teams, but in your specific case, if you need homers, you might want to keep Tellez a little bit longer. So that's always true. Now, I think it's going to be a very slow trade deadline. I don't really see big changers. You're not going to see these Broadway Hollywood trades of these blockbuster deals. But Clay, who else do you think is expected to change teams? I have to imagine the Mets are going to get rid of David Robertson. Anybody else of note that you think is going to change teams? And is there any fantasy guys to pick up right now, waiting on that? Meaning, oh, this guy is going to move, so you better pick up this guy. He might be interesting.
Well, the St. Louis Cardinals have already said publicly that they're going to be sellers, so and that they will trade people. So I think, even though the NL Central is wide open, they're going to probably be, moving guys in a fire sale essentially. So probably Jordan Montgomery, I would think. Maybe Jordan Hicks on the move. Maybe a guy like Paul DeYoung too. They have a number of guys. Tyler O'Neill potentially. I think. I think they're kind of done with Tyler O'Neill, so probably would be good for both sides to turn a page there. In a lot of leagues, you're not able to stash prospects like in the NFBC, but if you are able to, maybe a guy like Mason Wynn on that team. He's a shortstop prospect and really had a nice spring training, impressed a lot of people in the organization, and at AAA, he's got an 814 OPS, 14 homers, 16 bags. So, yeah, it's kind of like, well, why would they bring him up if they're selling? The guy's kind of earned it. He's kind of, I wouldn't say kicked the door down, but he's pounding pretty hard at that door. And Paul DeYoung's kind of had a resurgent campaign, but why not give him a look? I know Tommy Edmonds kind of inching closer, but I think you can maybe give Mason Wynn a look down the stretch if he's available. You can maybe pick him up. I'm trying to think of who else. I kind of like. He was already promoted, but Marco Luciano, he's up now. Not a trade that cleared the spot for him, but I think he'll be up for the Giants now. And not a great season overall in the minors, but he's been playing well over the past month or so. So maybe you give Marco Luciano a look.
All right, good stuff. Ruvain, anybody to add?
Yeah, I'm going to mention two guys from the trades that already happened. Justin Lawrence, I mean, he's a guy, he's probably going to be the closer there right now in Colorado if you really want to have the Colorado closer. And if you need a closer, I think he's a guy he's an instant pickup if he's available. And another guy, a guy in Cleveland, I did a little, looking at their page on Roster Resource, and I'm looking, and this guy named Brian Rocchio. He's been playing for Cleveland. He's in the AAA. They brought him up for a cup of coffee already earlier in the season. In the minors, in AAA, he's a third base shortstop. In the minors, 298, 3 homers, and 19 stolen bases. So he's a guy that because they traded away Rosario, he may be called up and he may actually get some playing time, and he's available in a lot of leagues. So if you need stolen bases, he may be a guy you can stick in there, and be able to get the stolen bases that you were hoping to get from Ahmed Rosario.
All right, let's do some waiver wire picks. Let's talk about a few potential people to pick up that might help you this week. Could be a shallow, could be deep league. I'll leave it up to you. Clay, why don't you go first? Who's a couple guys that you might want to pick up now?
Well, I think the number one priority, if he's out there miraculously somehow, is Trevor Story. He's could be back as soon as this weekend, inching up the minor league ladder on his rehab. So, if you can, if he's still out there, I'd get pretty aggressive on Story. Also, Alex Kirilloff, kind of my second, pie in the sky if he's out there sort of guy. He's kind of taken off in recent weeks for Minnesota, and looks like he'll be, playing a lot for a team that's battled a ton of injuries. He's now hurt too, of course. But assuming this is nothing too bad with his shoulder, I think Kirilloff could be in for a really nice final couple months. It's some guys who, maybe a bit more widely available. Well, let me see here. I had Mason Wynn, but Sal Frelick. We were just talking Brewers. Sal Frelick's up. Not a ton of category juice here, I don't think. He's the minor league numbers, only 2 homers and 8 bags in 40 games with Nashville. But he can hit, and I believe in the hit tool. We saw a little bit in the WBC. A great start for him with the Brewers, 5 for 12 with 5 walks against only 2 strikeouts. So I think Sal Frelick's a guy who, if you can, live with him maybe not being the most exciting, impactful guy in the stolen base and home run categories, he could be a nice net positive for you in the end. And finally, I'll say Kevin Ginkel, because I just picked him up in a league. Maybe a short window. Maybe Arizona goes and trades for a closer, but I think any window for a closer is useful. So I think Kevin Ginkel should have a nice little stretch here where he can close.
Yeah, no, good call on Ginkel. Definitely someone to look at. Frelick, by the way, also has a homer in the first couple of games.
Yeah, that's right.
Think Stephen Kwan. That's sort of the type of player that you get from Sal Frelick. Very unsexy, but should get on base a lot. The hit tool's really good average. Will give you a couple of bags, occasionally a homer. So it's, again, somebody with overall good value, even though if he doesn't look like he's really picking it in any one single category. Stephen Kwan is sort of my comp for him. Ruvain, what about you? Any guys to pick up?
Yeah, I want to mention. I mean, Marco Luciano was already mentioned, but we saw him playing in the Arizona Fall League 2 years ago. He looked pretty good then. The question is, how much playing time is he going to get? Because Brandon Corbett's on the IL. He could be back next week, and Tyro Estrada could be back in 2 weeks. So it's possible that he may not get that much playing time in a couple of weeks. So even if you pick him up, it may only be for a short term, but it's still worth a shot because he is their top prospect. He is their guy, and I think next year he will be the guy. So here's something just to think about. John Birdie, he's eligible. He was taken only in 19% of CBS leagues. Eligible at second, third, shortstop. He's played the last 8 games in a row. He's scored 7 runs, 2 RBIs, 2 stolen bases. He's getting on base. He's batting close to 400 in those games. If you need a stolen base guy, he's a perfect guy for that. And Clay, you mentioned Trevor Story. I'm going to mention Brendan Rodgers. 9% owned in CBS. He's on a rehab assignment. He could be activated August 7th. So this is the week to get him. The Rockies play a lot of their games down the stretch at home, and a healthy Brendan Rodgers is not a bad thing to have, especially if you can get him for very cheap.
Clay, why isn't John Birdie running more? He has a pretty good average this year, and you'd think with all that he would have at least like 20 steals. Why does Freddie Freeman have about the same steals as John Birdie this year?
That's a good question. I don't know exactly, but I'd imagine it has to do with the philosophy there and their new manager, former Red. What the hell was his name? Sorry, I should know. Skip Schumacher, of course. he was with the Reds a couple years, but maybe it's just Schumacher not wanting to run as much. I think that would probably explain it. I don't think it's something where his skills have diminished or anything like that, or he doesn't want to. I'd imagine it's just the yellow and red light is on a little bit more for him.
Okay.
You guys agree?
Yeah.
Philosophy, it has to be team philosophy.
Yeah, Marlins ranked 23rd in terms of stolen bases, tied for 23rd with the Dodgers. So they are bottom 10 in steals this year.
Yeah, so it's a philosophical change, I guess, because he's getting on base. You think that if John Birdie's on base, there's the steals, but not. So it comes to show you that stolen bases is almost more a product of the organizational's philosophy and the green light given to them more than their own skill. Because John Birdie could have ended up with 50 steals this year if he wanted, really.
Yeah. And I'll throw out another name, probably rostered in your deeper leagues, but Luis Funky Cold Medina for Oakland's been pitching pretty well. He does walk kind of a fine line with the free passes, but he's got a 2.90 ERA over his last 6 outings, Luis Medina. And you're probably not using him this weekend against Colorado, but then he's, I think, home against San Francisco next week. So a guy to consider if you need pitching help. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Now, before some other pitchers, I'll just give you some of my picks here. Aside from what we already mentioned, Kirilloff's teammate Max Kepler, only 15% owned. I was high on him before the season started. He's hot lately. He's now up to 14 homers overall, and that's with all his injuries. And since June 30th, 4 homers, batting .316 and 15 RBIs. So I think that's somebody to take a look. Maybe he was not healthy before, but he's almost a 25 home run player who can have a decent average, and they bat him in the heart of the lineup. So I think Kepler is interesting.
You think he could be traded? I think he's a name that I've heard rumored in trade. Sorry to cut you off.
And he would fit very well in left field in Yankee Stadium, I think, because they don't have a left fielder. And they've been rumored to the Yankees so many times that there's a very good chance he may get traded there because the Yankees and Twins have a history of trades.
Yeah, and that could open up a spot for Matt Wallner if Kepler is traded.
Yeah, I can definitely see that happening. The guy we've mentioned before, but reliever Joel Payamps. I don't really know how to pronounce his name, Joel, but he's only owned in 25%. He's got a 1.71 ERA, a .87 WHIP, 54 strikeouts in 47 innings, and this is not a one-year thing. Over his career, which is 160 innings, 2.87 ERA, 1.17 WHIP. He's like picture Yanier Cano. He's easily the setup man in Minnesota. By the way, the last time he gave up a hit or a walk was 7 outings ago on July 6th. And the last time Pamps gave up a run was 17 outings ago, June 10th. The guy has been unbelievable. 0 ERA and a .35 WHIP with 21K to 21K in 17 innings ratio. That is crazy. He's been fantastic. He's been the best reliever in baseball in that stretch. So, maybe he's due for a blow-up, but this guy looks good. Ruben and I went to see a Brewers game, Brewers versus the Mets in person, and, man, that guy looked really, really good.
Yeah, his stuff looked electric. It looked even better than Devin Williams that night that we saw him. His stuff was biting, and the Mets were flailing away. I mean, the Mets do that a lot, but the Mets were flailing away, and it was just he looked overpowering at that point. And he doesn't throw 100 miles an hour, and he just looked overpowering.
Yeah. All right, pitcher preview. Anybody to add in terms of pitchers to pick up? Let's go to Ruvain first.
All right, I got a couple. Now, we're talking about the 2-star and possible, whether or not you want to do that or not. I have one possible 2-star pitcher next week, and that's Jose Quintana, if he's still on the Mets. He's 32% on CBS right now. He's possible 2-star at Kansas City and at Baltimore. I like the 1 start against Kansas City. I'm not so thrilled about the second one at Baltimore because it's at Baltimore, and Baltimore is good, but he is 32% owned. He's available. His last couple starts, he's a 3.27 ERA. He's got 8 strikeouts in 11 innings, so he's a guy to think about. Now, I have 2 other single-start guys that are a little bit more appetizing, and that's Adrian Hauser. He's only 8% owned in CBS, which means he's available, and he's facing Washington at Washington. I like that matchup. That's a very good matchup, I think. In Adrian Hauser's last 3 starts, he's gone 16 2/3 innings with 19 strikeouts. So he will get you some strikeouts when playing against Washington. for Milwaukee, he has a good chance of wins. And another guy who you may want to think about, it's Ross Stripling. I don't know how far he's going to go in the game, but he's only 15% on in CBS, and he's playing at Oakland. Anyone at Washington or at Oakland, sign me up.
Well, you really ripped my list. Those were my guys, really. So good job, Ruvain. I know we'll be on par for pickups this week. How about you, Clay?
Well, a guy who I kind of had in my head, he's been kind of disappointing this year, but then I looked, he's got 11 wins. So he's probably not going to be out there in a lot of leagues. But Taijuan Walker at Miami, then versus Kansas City next week. Somehow was dropped or sitting out there. Go out and get him. And then this one's kind of a stretch because I think we've kind of all been burned by him at some point. He's starting tomorrow, but then next week he lines up to face your Mets at home. Brady Singer. Now, again, we've all kind of been down this road. It hasn't been pretty for the most part, but he's, aside from one bad outing recently, he's pitched okay lately. His last 5 starts, he has a 3.66 ERA, 23 Ks. Not a guy who's going to miss a ton of bats, but if your Mets sell off a few pieces, that outing next week could be pretty nice for Brady Singer. So I'd consider him if you're desperate for an arm. Maybe Ryan Yarbrough too on that team. It's scraping the bottom of the barrel, but he's a deep pull if you need a guy. He went 6 innings earlier this week.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is when you're looking on the waiver wire, very important for pitchers, look at pitchers who go deeper into games. Look at the best stat is innings pitched per innings pitched per game start. I know when I'm doing my Tout Wars rankings preseason and I'm trying to look at who I'm going to pick, I pick high innings pitched to game starts because those are the guys who get you more innings for point leagues, but those are guys who get you wins. Brady Singer, last couple games in terms of innings, 6, 8, 5, 7, 6, 7. That is good. And in that span, he has 2 wins. So, you're going to, and he has a couple of decisions. So even if it's a bad pitcher, if they're pitching many innings, they're going to get you more decisions. And if your roto team can stand a ratio hit, losses don't count. Those are the guys who are interesting if they're available. So I like that pick of Singer.
And Yarbrough, his last, he wasn't stretched out earlier in the year, but last 3 starts, 6 innings, 5 2/3, and 6. So he's been piling up the innings lately.
Yep, getting there. Innings, it's playing time, as we say here. Playing time is king. There are 3 important things in fantasy baseball: playing time, and then follow rules number 1 and 2. So there you go.
Yeah,
all right.
And another guy, one last guy I'll just throw out there, kind of pitching more in the bulk relief role, but that's actually proven to be a good thing for him. Nick Pivetta.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize just how good he's been lately in that bulk relief role. So kind of, not necessarily in that rotation technically, but he still takes the ball every 5th day and has a better chance to earn wins working in bulk relief.
Oh yeah, that's a ticket right to more wins. You can pitch 2 innings and get it. And Pivetta is not available in any of my leagues. That's because I picked them up in a bunch.
Nice.
So that definitely a great pick, and he's looking great. We have like a 12 or 13 strikeout game a couple weeks ago. He just looks fabulous. And the Red Sox need innings. The Red Sox need innings these days.
Yeah, and I know that they are going to sit down with Tanner Houck and Garrett Whitlock and discuss their roles. Either way, I think Pivetta, with the way he's pitching, should be in there. It sounds like Houck and or Whitlock could return in relief, which kind of surprises me.
All right, Ruvain, up to your injury report. What do we got going into the trade deadline?
Well, we hit a lot of them already during this podcast, but we'll start with Brandon Crawford. He's on the IL with left knee inflammation. He did not need an injection, and he's reporting improvement. Marco Luciano was called up, but Casey Schmidt, if he continues to hit okay, he will still get more playing time than Luciano. You never know how the split's going to be. Mentioned Jesse Winker is on the IL with back spasms. We don't know how bad it's going to be. Abraham Toro was called up, and Sal Frelick, like Clay mentioned, has been getting a lot more playing time since then. Chris Bryant was placed on the IL with a fractured left index finger. No word on how long he'll be out for. If surgery is required, he may be out up to 8 weeks. If not, it may only be about 4 weeks. But in the meantime, Randall Grichuk is a guy you can look for if he's on your waiver wire to try to get to get some more power there. Gabriel Moreno was placed on the IL with left shoulder inflammation. We don't know how bad it is yet. He had sat out the couple of games before then. Carson Kelly will be the primary catcher again for the Diamondbacks. And I want to end on positive. You mentioned Trevor's story that he's going to be coming back possibly very soon. Chris Sale, he's been on the IL since early June with a stress reaction in his left scapula. He will begin a rehab assignment next week if the live batting practice he had today, he pitched it today, goes well. If all goes well, he could be in the Red Sox starting rotation again early to mid-August.
All right, there you go. What a great show today. A lot of great strategy. Good players mentioned. I want to thank you, Clay Link, for coming on the show. Thank you so much. And why don't you just tell everyone where we can listen and read and hear all things Clay Link?
Yeah, check us out over at RotoWire. A lot of attention being paid to fantasy football this time of year, but we're still grinding away on baseball. We have everything you need over there. RotoWire.com/try for a trial on us. At Clay W. Link on Twitter. Check out the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast as well. And yeah, I really appreciate you guys inviting me on. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Ariel and Ruvain. And hope, to reciprocate, maybe have you guys on our show soon.
Well, sounds good, and always a pleasure having you as well. We haven't seen you at the last first pitch, so hopefully you can come to that.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Oh, amazing!
I'll be there this year. So
right,
yeah,
fantastic.
I gotta catch up with all of you guys, and hopefully everybody can make it out this year.
That sounds good. Amazing. All right. Once again, actually, let's go to Ruvain first. Ruvain, why don't you tell us what's going on with you?
You can follow me on Rotoballer, where I have a weekly article coming out every week discussing all the injuries I discussed today, as well as other injuries as well. And you can follow me on Twitter at MLB Injury Guru, where I tweet out injury updates as they come, next man up, and all that.
All right, I'm Ariel Cohen. You can read my work over at Fangraphs, over at Rotoballer, and I'm on Twitter at ATCNY, and of course, right here on the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. All right. Once again, thank you so much to Clay Link for joining the show. And from all of us here at Beat the Shift, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Beat the Shift podcast presented by Fangraphs. Follow us on Twitter at beat_shift_pod.